I want to say greetings to you from the Tennessee Bible College in Cookeville, Tennessee, from the faculty and the staff and the students. And I was mentioning to some of them a while ago, our president, David Hill, whom has been here before, was telling us in one of our last meetings that we now serve more students than we have since the college has been in existence. We're in our 40th or 41st year, I'm not sure which. I'll tell you one experience about one of our students we've got now. Brother Clark Sims came to us about 2 years ago from Nashville Rescue Mission. So that ought to tell you something. He said that he had gotten just about as far down as you could get, and I guess they introduced him to some kind of Bible study, because they do. It's not right kind, but at least they got him interested. And somehow or other, he got a hold of us, called our dean, and said he wanted to go to school, and he came. I told him, and I really believe this, I believe that was the providence of God. Because why didn't he go to a denominational seminary? He had been there for maybe 2 or 3 months. He came into my office one day, and I'd been teaching first principle lessons to him. Even if it didn't fit in the class, I'd work it in the class. And he came into my office one day, and he said, I've been talking to Glenn Ramsey, and he said I needed to be baptized for the remission of my sins. I said, well, have you ever done that? I knew he hadn't. He said, no, I've not. I said, well, what do you want to do? I said, you want to talk about it? He said, no, I want to be baptized. He said, right now. I took him over to the northeast building. The baptistry was ice cold, and baptized him. And since then, now that was probably a year and a half ago, and since then, he's already converted his mom and dad. I baptized them about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. So we're thankful. We don't dwell on the numbers as much, because we'd love to have them on campus. I would like to have 30 in every class I teach. But I think the class I've got now on campus has got 3 in it. But that's still souls that we're sending out to preach the gospel, and that's what these other guys that I understand are from the other, from Southeastern Institute of the Bibles and Bears Valley, or the others. We're not in competition. We're all trying to get people to heaven and trying to train Christian workers. So if you ever come our way, then we'd be glad to have you there. So I'm thankful for the invitation. I am thankful that Shirley got to come with me. She's my chauffeur. Thanks to Rob for loaning us his car and trusting her to drive me around, but I'm certainly glad that she came with me as well. I am in my 57th year, I think, of preaching the gospel. What he was talking about, I was working with the Double Springs congregation and Northeast at first for a few years, and one night, Brother Malcolm came to me and he said, can you come over here with the elders down there, allow you to come on Wednesday night and teach our Bible class? He said, I want to go back in the back and teach a young married couples class on marriage in the home. And I said, sure. It seemed like it was 12 weeks. It may not have been that many. And I'm in my 36th year, I think, now, teaching that class. And by the way, Thomas Warren, you know who he was, if the others don't. Thomas Warren was in the first class I taught, and I thought, I don't need to be teaching this class. He does. Thomas Warren, one of the best scholars we ever had. But, and let me add to that, though, guess who? The first person that came to me after class was over and encouraged me and said, great job, Brother Warren. So that's the kind of man he was. Down to our lesson tonight. We are discussing David, and especially faith in the life of David this week. David was the second king of Israel, and he is one of the best known Old Testament characters. And there's still, even though he was an Old Testament character, there's still a lot to be learned from the Old Testament. Romans 15:4 said things written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. And so in this lesson, we're going to be considering faith as the foundation of the heart. And we're going to go through each individual part of that as we go along. And I'll try my best to get this material in the time allotted. I may have talked too much to start with, but I think I'm still going to be on time here, all right. In 1 Samuel 16 is our text tonight. And due to the disobedience of King Saul, back in chapter 15, you remember where he was sent to destroy the Amalekites and not leave anything left breathing. And you remember the sin that he committed when he came back, that he had old King Agag, and he had flocks that he'd brought back with him, and he made some of the feeblest excuses you ever heard. But that's not what we're here to deal with tonight. Because of that, in chapter 16, we find that God sent Samuel to Jesse to find the next king. He sent him with these instructions in verse 1. He said, I have provided, the margin says chosen. So I have provided or chosen me a king among his sons. And so as the selection process proceeded, it appeared that Samuel had the wrong thing in mind for a man to be a leader of God's people. The important sentiment in this chapter, the most important statement in this chapter actually, is the one in verse 7 that God made to Samuel. He said, but the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. It's interesting, to me at least, in my studies a lot of times, I have at least 4 translations online that I look at the way they translate these words, these verses. And I like to look at Young's literal translation. I don't know if you've ever looked at that or not, but a lot of times I use I'm still using the old King James Version. The New King James I think is great. All of them may have little difficulties in places. The American Standard, and then I've got Young's literal translation in the English Standard that I compare. But on this verse, the way that he translates this, especially the last part of it, he said, Jehovah saith unto Samuel, look not unto his appearance and unto the height of his stature, for I have rejected him. Or it is not as man seeth. Now notice, for man looketh at the eyes, and Jehovah looketh at the heart. So either way you look at it, both those translations are hitting the physical appearance with the things that can be seen with the eye, that is, those things that can be seen with the eye, versus those things that cannot be seen with the eye. And he calls it the heart. God, without hesitation, states that the latter is more important than the former. But before we go any farther, let's qualify what we're talking about. What is the heart? You know, people over the years, they have said as you try to teach them the Word of God, they'll pat themselves and they'll say, I wouldn't give what I feel right in here for all the Bibles in the world. Well, what you feel right in here is not anything except a blood pump. It pumps blood throughout your body, and you can't live physically without it. But that's not the heart that he's talking about here. It's not the physical heart, but it's that which the Bible describes, and I'm just going to read through these because I don't want to take a lot of time looking at these. But it's the heart with which man believes. Romans 10 and verse 10, for with the heart man believeth unto righteousness. Acts 8, 36 and 37, when Philip had been teaching the eunuch, he had started at the same scripture that he was reading and preached unto them Jesus. When they came to a certain water, they said, see, here is water. The eunuch did. See, here is water. What doth hinder me from being baptized? And he said, if thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. And so, again, that passage, both of those passages shows that the heart is something by which we believe. It's also something with which we think. Solomon said in Proverbs 23 and verse 7, as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. It is that by which we purpose, and the word purpose, according to the New Oxford American Dictionary, means to have as one's intention or objective. So it's that which we set as an intention to do, or an objective to do. Purposing, or I think the word planning would fit there. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 7, he said, every man according as he purposes in his heart. He's talking about giving, but I'm just using enough of it to show you what he's saying about the heart. It is that by which we purpose or plan. It's also that with which we reason. In Mark chapter 2, when Jesus was about to heal the paralytic, he first told him, son, thy sins be forgiven thee. And they started talking to themselves and thinking among themselves, saying, who's he? Why does he think he can forgive sins? Only God can do that. And Jesus asked them, he said, why reason ye these things in your heart? And so, just to name a few things, that's the part of man that believes, with which we believe, with which we think, with which we purpose, and which we reason. But why is it so important? We're talking about tonight faith as the foundation of the heart. Why is it so important that the heart have the proper foundation to begin with? Well, again, let's look at the scriptures. Proverbs 4 and verse 23. He said, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Well, it begins to seem very important, does it not? Matthew chapter 12, verses 34 and 35. He said, O generation of vipers, how can you being evil speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. A good man out of the good treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. And so he's saying here that if the heart does not have the right foundation, then the wrong things are going to come out of it. If it has the right foundation, if it's properly founded, then we're going to see that he says, out of the abundance of the heart comes good things. He continues in Matthew 15, verses 18 through 20. When he said, those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart proceed, notice, evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. And so I believe you can see from these passages that it's very important that the heart have the proper foundation. But again, consider how the heart is described in scriptures. And I've got about 27, maybe 30 things here, and I'm just going to give you the scriptures. If you wish to have these later, I'll be glad to give them to you. But I'm just going to mention this and give you the scripture. The heart can fail, Genesis 42, verse 28. The heart can faint, Genesis 45, verse 26. The heart can be glad, Exodus 4, verse 14. The heart can be hardened, Exodus 7 and verse 14. The heart can be willing, Exodus 31, or Exodus 35 rather, in verse 5. The heart can be wise, Exodus 31 and verse 6. The heart can be discouraged, Numbers 32 and verse 7. The heart can tremble, Deuteronomy 28 and verse 65. It can be merry, Judges 16 and verse 25. It can rejoice, 1 Samuel 2 and verse 1. The heart can even smite you. Listen to what he said in 1 Samuel 24 and verse 5. He said it came to pass afterwards that David's heart smote him because he had cut off Samuel's skirt. Again, that don't sound like the physical heart. I don't think this heart's ever smote us. Actually, if it starts doing something like that, we're in trouble, aren't we? But the Bible heart can smite you. In Job 15 and verse 12, the Bible heart can carry thee away. Job 23 and verse 16, it can be soft. You ever heard of people being soft-hearted? And again, that's not talking about this blood pump when we're soft-hearted. It can be an understanding heart, 1 Kings 3 and verse 9. It can sing for joy. You know your heart can sing. The Bible heart can. Job 29 verse 13. It can be deceived. Job 31 and verse 9. It can be secretly enticed. Job 31 and verse 27. It can be as firm as a stone. Job 41 and verse 24. It can be soft or it can be firm as a stone, and we've already seen it can be hard. It can be, we can meditate, Psalm 19 verse 14. It can trust, Psalm 28 and verse 7. It can devise wicked imaginations, Proverbs 6:18. It can be pure, blessed are the pure in heart, Matthew 5 and verse 8. It can be darkened, Romans 1:21. It can be hard and impenitent, Romans 3:5. It can be comforted, Colossians 2:2. It can be evil, Hebrews 3 and verse 12. It can even condemn us, 1 John 3 and verse 20. And then in addition to that, you can be stirred up by it, Exodus 35 and verse 21. You can be lifted up by it, 2 Kings 14 and verse 10. You can have sorrow of heart, Nehemiah 2:2. You can obey from the heart, Romans 6:17 and 18. We'll talk about that again, probably if not today, in the next lesson we're in. You can have Christ dwell in your heart by faith, Ephesians 3:17. And you can have the peace of God ruling in your heart, Colossians 3 and verse 15. So there's 3, 6, 27, 33 things. And that's just beginning to kind of touch the hem of the garment. And so this list and the number of things that the heart can do or can do for you can go on and on. But I believe this summary that I've given you very hurriedly, this sampling at least, is enough for us to see and understand the importance of having the proper foundation. We teach our kids to sing, "The wise man built his house upon the rock." Why is that important? Because of the foundation. And we're going to talk even more about that foundation here in just a minute. But we're talking about faith as the foundation of the heart, and we've been describing or trying to describe what the Bible heart is. Now, why faith? Why should faith be the foundation of the heart? These seem like just simply first principle thoughts, but you'd be surprised how many people couldn't answer that. Why should faith be the foundation of the heart? Well, the Hebrew writer describes faith in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1 when he says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." Have you ever thought about that word substance? The word substance, and this is Young's definition, Young's analytical concordance of Bible words. He says the word that's translated here, substance, means that what stands under or substratum or substratum. I'm not sure how you pronounce that word. And since when I saw that, I wasn't sure what it meant either. I always look up words if I'm going to use them and I don't know what they mean exactly. And here's what the New Oxford American Dictionary says. That word that Young's says it means what stands under or a substratum. He says that means an underlying layer or substance, in particular, a layer of rock or soil beneath the surface of the ground. Well, that kind of sounds like it's laying a foundation, doesn't it? But then he goes on to say, this the same dictionary, a foundation or basis of something. Now, faith is the substance. Faith is the foundation. Faith is the basis of what we hope for. If you don't have any faith, where's the hope? If you don't have any faith, why would you even desire? Why would you even be looking for anything? And so faith is the foundation. In Hebrews 11 and 1, this meaning, the meaning there is confidence or assurance or the giving substance to. That's what W.E. Vines described the word to mean. And so it's because of this foundation, it's because of the faith that we have that serves as the foundation that lets us sing truthfully, blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. We can have that blessed assurance because we've got the proper foundation, and that's faith. Therefore, faith is the foundation on which the whole Christian life is constructed. for primary obedience. Even when we become Christians, he says, for by grace are you saved through faith. And I've heard preachers look at that in various ways. Sometimes preachers will say grace is God's part, faith is man's part, and that certainly is true. Sometimes I've looked at that, and it's hard to tell completely from the text whether he's using the word faith as our faith or whether he's using the word faith as the faith, but it doesn't really matter. It's true either way you look at it. If it's talking about God saving us by faith, by grace through the faith, then that's through the Bible, then that's true. Or if it's talking about him saving, his part is grace, which provided the plan, and includes everything that God has done for us to make salvation possible, and then faith is our part in obeying that plan, then that's still true too. So I don't really have to decide which one's right, because whichever translation is correct there, both of them are true. Now, if you get two different translations, they're butting heads, and you got problems. You mistranslated, and you know you have. But that's saying that when you become a Christian, faith serves as a foundation of you becoming a Christian. But it also serves as foundation of the Christian life. For instance, we study often 2 Peter chapter 1. That's one of my favorite passages of scriptures to teach from. But most of the time, I have found that when people preach from that passage, and growing up, I heard preachers preach on the 7 Christian graces. I don't think I've heard that title given to a sermon for 20 years. But growing up, I heard that often. But the 7 graces that he mentions there, and some people will put in faith with it, and that makes 8. And over in 2 Corinthians, Paul is talking about giving, and he says, see that you abound in this grace also. So there's not just 7 graces. I like to call those the stair steps of building the Christian life. Because you take, he says, and what I started to say is a lot of people in preaching on those start with verse 5. Where he says, beside this, giving all diligence, add to your faith, and then go from there. But I always looked at that verse and I said, beside this, beside what? So I like to back up and look at it's loaded. There's sermons, not just a sermon, there's sermons in the first 4 verses there. And so we need to go back and look at that. And then he said, now alongside this, right beside that, he said, you've got the instruction that you need to add to your faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, godliness, brotherly kindness, and love. But if you look at that, you're building a Christian life. And I tell my students, I tell the folks at Northeast, my Bible classes, they've heard this so many times I can just start to tell it and they know what I'm going to say. You never, as a Christian, when you look at these things you're to build in your Christian life, add your faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, you never can take those or any other requirements as far as that goes. You can never put those down. I'm supposed to do this, and this. And there's not ever a time, as long as you live, that you can check one of those off and say, I've got that one accomplished. Because the Christian life is a life of continual growth. Isn't that the way we pray? I know back home, often I hear people get up to lead the prayer and they say, Father, help us to be a better Christian today than we were yesterday. And if we live, help us to be a better Christian tomorrow than we were today. That's because we're supposed to keep on growing. Recently, we lost one of our elders. Brother Oliver Anderson had just turned 90. Never been sick hardly a day in his life except one time when he was a young man. And he got sick and died. One of the finest men I ever seen. But I would always use him. When I was making this point, I'd always use him. I said, Oliver's sitting right over here. And I said, he'll tell you right now that when we talk about the need to study the Bible, whatever the responsibility we have, he'll tell you that he's 90, been studying the Bible for many, many years, but he still studies it and still needs to study. And so you can't check these things off, but they all start with faith. Add to your faith. And folks, there's not anything in the Bible accidental. And the order is important. Add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge. Just to show you that, I'm not going to preach a lesson on those things tonight, but the word virtue, among other things. Now, it's got more definitions than one, but among other things, it is courage. And so he says, and I'll usually define that as courage of convictions. But look at Saul of Tarsus. Saul of Tarsus had courage of his convictions, didn't he? But it had to be tempered with knowledge. So he says, add to your faith virtue, but temper that with knowledge. Add to your virtue knowledge. And so faith is the foundation of the whole Christian life. It's also the foundation of staying faithful. Now, we've already talked about beginning and building, but listen, turn to 1 Peter for a moment if you got your Bibles. He says in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 3 beginning, Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again unto a lively or living hope by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance, notice how he describes it, incorruptible, undefiled, doesn't fade away, and it's reserved in heaven for you. But there's some conditions. You who are kept, notice, by the power of God. But he didn't stop there. He didn't put a period there. You know, our denominational friends want to take that and they want to put a period there, and they say, well, as long as you're kept by the power of God, you can't be lost. Well, that would be true if that's all there was to it. But he said you're kept by the power of God through faith unto salvation. And so not only do you have to have faith on your part to become a Christian, you've got to keep faith on your part to stay a Christian. And again, he may be talking about the faith here. In other words, you're kept by the power of God through the faith. Either one of them is true. And so faith is the foundation on which the whole life is built. Now, here's the question. Did David, in his life, that's who we're talking about tonight, did David demonstrate that he had faith as the foundation of his heart? Well, let's go back for a minute where we begun. Look again at what is said of God's criteria for a man to lead his people. Man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. You know, that's great. You don't have to be 6'4" and the most handsome man ever lived. He can use a bald-headed man that's a little bit overweight, has to wear glasses in his service, as long as his heart's right. And so that's where we need to concentrate on. Now, I think we need to try to look good as we can, but that's not what's important. He said as long as that heart is right. So to God, the heart, a person's most innermost motivation and attitude, is of prime importance. In Isaiah 66 and verse 2, he said, But to this man will I look, even to him that is poor and of a contrite spirit, and trembleth at my word. Eliab's, that first son that marched out there before Samuel, and Samuel thought, man, is he a good-looking specimen. Surely this is God's king. And he was informed that he was not. David's heart did qualify him. David's accomplishments were many. I know you've studied about David many times. Some of the first Bible studies, Bible stories I remember as a kid. Before I started school, Mom had a Bible story book, and she read to me often. And some of those stories I still remember today, because some of them I like more than others, but I always liked hearing about David. He captured Jerusalem and made it the national capital and reunited the nation. In a 40-year span, he controlled an empire that stretched from Egypt to Mesopotamia. He was a man of many talents. He was a shepherd. He was a poet. He was a musician. He was a warrior and statesman, and he was an administrator who set a standard that was very strict and strong for many generations to come. Isn't it interesting that when you start studying the kings in the Old Testament, every time you had a good king, I don't care how many hundred years it was down the road or how many years it was, if he was a great king, you know what it said? He was a great king in the likeness of his father David. And if he was a bad king, they'd always said he did evil in the likeness of, was Jeroboam. I always get the Boams mixed up. It was Jeroboam, wasn't it? Jeroboam was the bad guy. Everyone that did bad after him. I believe I'd rather been David as Jeroboam, don't you? And we find that this young man, whose background was as a shepherd, herding sheep, writing poetry. Many of those psalms, they're called the Psalms of David. He didn't write them all, but even the ones that he didn't write, I think he would subscribe to. And so he wrote poetry. He played and sung songs under starry skies. But how did he become a fearless warrior? And I'm not going to get on to Brother Heinstein. Is that the way you pronounce it? Heinstein? What? Close enough? Okay. Wilmoth's called everything, so but I'm not going to try to encroach on him too much here, but I just want to mention just a few things because he's going to deal with this subject, I think the last subject in the lectureship. But David was a man after God's own heart. And again, I'm not going to steal all his points, I hope here. I'm just going to say a few things because I think we'll see how that fits in. When you consider all the problems that David had, all that he faced as king of Israel, someone might wonder why God thought so highly of David. Well, of course, God knows everything anyway. God knew what David was going to do, good and bad, before he selected him. Just like he knows your life that well. But we find that part of the answer is that in spite of his lapses, and yes, David made some pretty bad mistakes, big mistakes. But despite of his lapses, David usually wholeheartedly sought God's will. He didn't withdraw from the responsibilities of life. And the biblical record shows that the more conditions around David deteriorated, the more he grew in character. And we're going to be looking at some of those things throughout this lectureship this week. David remained faithful to God. Again, I'm not saying he would remain perfect, but basically remained faithful to God throughout his life. Now, there was those big lapses. I'm sure you're sitting there thinking Bathsheba and having Uriah murdered. Those were pretty bad lapses. But for the basic part of his life, he remained faithful to God. His loyalty to his Creator was beyond question. Read about his work in the Psalms. Turn over to the Psalm just a minute. Let's do just a little reading. I think we've got enough time to do that. Brother David Hill said the other Sunday, and he's teaching the life of Christ on Sunday morning, and a lot of times he said, let's just read from the Scriptures. Let the Bible tell this. And I think sometimes we don't do enough of that. So I want to read a little bit here for you in just a moment. I want to read Psalms 2 and maybe 3 and just a word or two out of another one. He said, why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said unto me, thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and ye perish from the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. Selah. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory and the lifter up of mine head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. Selah. I laid me down and slept. I waked, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. Think ye trusted the Lord? Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone. Thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon the people, Selah. And then he closes the 5th Psalm this way. But let all those that put their trust in thee rejoice. Let them ever shout for joy. Because thou defendest them, let them also that love thy name be joyful in thee. For thou, Lord, will bless the righteous. With favor wilt thou compass him as with a shield. And so he was, according to 2 Samuel 23 and verse 1, David was the man who was raised up on high. He was the anointed of the God of Jacob, and he was a sweet psalmist of Israel. And Luke, in his writing the book of Acts, he gave the assessment of the Apostle Paul that David was a man after God's own heart, and that's what we just read from the Old Testament as well. And what a tribute that would be, and what a tribute that was to that former shepherd boy who became king. And all of his accomplishments, every accomplishment that he had has to be contributed to God. Isn't that true of us today? I don't care how great you are, how much you've done in the kingdom. I just finished a few years ago now, I guess, been longer than I think it's been. But I just finished putting together a class for the Northeast on restoration history. The first time I studied restoration history, I was a young preacher, very young preacher, under Malcolm Hill in first classes Tennessee Bible College had. And to tell you the truth, I was bored to death. I studied it this time with a different attitude, and that was the most interesting study I ever put together. And I was studying, I was still putting the notes together as I was teaching it on Wednesday night. And I'm not stretching this. I've been sitting at my computer putting those notes together and reading and making those keynote address in my notes. And I'd look at my watch and it'd be 1 o'clock in the morning. Or it'd be 12:30 at night. And I didn't want to quit. That's how interesting it was. Now, would you take my course online? That wasn't what I was setting out to do, but it's online now because the guy that was teaching that online left us, and so I put mine on there. But I did, I enjoyed it. But now what I started to tell you, we've had some spiritual giants in the Lord's church over the years. Some of the greatest scholars that you'll ever find. But those scholars and those giants, whatever they contributed, for instance, Marshall Keeble. Anybody know who Marshall Keeble was? Marshall Keeble was one of the greatest evangelists ever. He was a black evangelist that it's estimated, because I don't think they have the exact true records, but it's estimated that he probably baptized 40,000 people, established hundreds, maybe thousands of churches. Many of them among his black brethren, but white people flocked to hear him in the 50s. When segregation was involved, they flocked to hear him because he's such a great preacher. But what I'm saying is, everything they did has to be contributed to God. It's not because they were so great. Now, they had ability, but God used it. And so when we look at David, everything he accomplished has to be contributed to God. to David's strong faith in him, which served as the foundation of his heart. Now, what can we get out of this? What lessons can we find from this? Number one, build your life on the foundation of faith, which will lead you to do what it did for David, lead you to obey all God's commandments. Don't let outward appearance get in your way. Don't let outward things get in your way. As we bring this lesson to a close, turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. One of my favorite passages of Scripture, and I read this often. Beginning with verse 15. Got to get in the right chapter here. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 15. I'm still now. Here you go. I got it in the right book. I just can't find it. By the way, this is what happens to you when you get macular degeneration. I've got a giant print Bible and it weighs 4 pounds. 2 Corinthians 4:15. Paul said, "For all things are for your sakes," talking to the Corinthians, "that the abundant grace might, through the thanksgiving of many, redound to the glory of God." Remember Matthew 5:16, we're to let our light shine before men that others may see our good works and glorify God in turn. So he said, everything I'm doing for your sakes is in order that the abundant grace might, through the thanksgiving of many, those Corinthians, abound to the glory of God. Paul's not seeking glory. Then he says, "For which cause we faint not. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day." Was Paul's outward man perishing? Yeah, he was being beaten. Go over to 2 Corinthians 11 and read the account of all the things he went through. And he said, even though our outward man is perishing, the inward man, wait just a minute, isn't that where our lesson's on? The inward man, isn't that the heart? So he said the heart is being renewed day by day. He is growing stronger inside, even though he's being beaten to death on the outside. For our light affliction, light affliction? What Paul went through? For our light affliction, he's going to show you why he calls it light affliction in a moment, is but for a moment, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Now I see why he called it light affliction. He's comparing it with glory. The weight of eternal glory. I don't care what you have to pay and what you have to go through and what you have to suffer. If you get to heaven, it's going to be nothing. It'd be light affliction compared with this. And then he said, this is the way he got through that. He said, while we look not at the things which are seen. Kind of what God told Samuel, didn't he? Don't be looking at the appearance. But he says that the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And so Paul, like David, went through a lot. I want to ask you, do you think it's worth it? Do you think Paul thought it was worth it? In 2 Timothy 4:6-8, he said, the time of my departure is at hand. I fought a good fight. I'm now ready to be offered, he said. I've fought a good fight. I've kept the faith. And he said, henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me in that day. And not to me only, but to all them always that love his appearing. I believe if you ask Paul, I don't know how heaven's going to be. I hope we get to sit down and talk with Paul. I'd love to do that about as much as anything I can think of. I don't know what it's going to be like, but I'll guarantee you, if you ask him, if you get to heaven and you get to ask Paul, Paul, was it worth what you went through to get here? He's not going to say no because of this statement right here. Faith then is the foundation of your life, just like it was the foundation of David's. Should be. If you destroy the foundation, if you destroy the faith, then the superstructure, if there's any there, even start, is going to fall. But if you build that superstructure on that faith, on that solid foundation, it'll never fall as long as you look to God and his word. Thank you.